My guess is that everyone here likes a really good story, maybe even loves a good story. And I'm thinking I'm probably not the only one here that does this. If you're a sports fan, you might do this as well. That when I'm watching sports of a sport I really love, but maybe two teams that I really don't care who wins out of the two teams. I just like the sports and I like to watch it. What I almost always do will root for the underdog. I'll figure out which team is least likely to win, and I'll cheer that team on unless they come out and start crushing the other team. Then I just switch teams and start rooting for the other one. And you might wonder, like, why would you do that? Because I'm just crazy enough to think my screaming and yelling at the TV actually might change the outcome of a game. And I love a great comeback. I just love a great comeback story. I actually like comeback stories better than I like underdog stories. And there are some great comeback stories in the history just of our country. To start with, Abraham Lincoln would be one of those. Abraham Lincoln, many of us know this from studying back in school, or if you're in school studying about him, that he had two businesses that failed. Bankruptcy, made it to election time and lost somewhere around 8 times. He lost elections before he eventually became elected one of the greatest presidents, arguably, in the history of our nation at an incredibly important time where we needed an Abraham Lincoln. When we think about the sports world, so many stories of comebacks, but I'll just pick one. Big George Foreman, amazing comeback. This guy at 45 years old became the world champion in boxing, the heavyweight champion of the world. And then there's the Apple Corporation. Apple Corporation was on the verge. They had 90 days left until they would hit bankruptcy when this guy, Steve Jobs, took the wheel. And within a decade, it had $1 trillion valuation. I mean, like, that's a massive comeback for a corporation. And then there's a guy his name is Harland. And I've heard that those old names are starting to come back. He lived in the 1950s. I don't know if you ever want to name your kid Harland, but if you want to, go ahead. But this guy's name was Harland. And what happened with him is that, you got ahead of me, TJ. That's all right. So Harland actually is Colonel Sanders. And so Colonel Sanders, what the story behind him is this, that in 1955, he received his first Social Security check, and it was $105. And some of us complain about Social Security today. $105 is all he got. And then with that, he eventually became impoverished. And at 65 years old, he launched a plan to actually start some franchises known as Kentucky Fried Chicken, obviously. And what he did with that is he went to over 1,000 people and got no, until eventually he found his way to somebody that said yes. And the rest is history on that. But the greatest comeback story of all times would be the story of Jesus. In the Gospel of Mark, we read about it. And it's the death and the resurrection of Jesus that we're going to celebrate here in just a couple weeks. But in some sense, we celebrate it every single week. We celebrate Jesus's birth every single week in one way or another, and ought to live that out of our lives every single day. And we've been chasing for 11 weeks the stories of Jesus, some comeback stories that happened for people that were down and out, and Jesus stepped in and brought them back. And today we're going to look at 3 of those stories, and we're going to open up our Bibles together. And I want to invite you, as you open your Bible, to go to the book of Numbers. And we're going to start there. So the 4th book of the Bible, it's in the Torah, or the law. It's in the Mosaic law, those books that Moses is attributed to writing. And in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, we're gonna start there today. And your question might be this, like, what does Numbers have to do with Mark? If we're gonna look at the stories in Mark, what does Numbers have to do with it? And maybe more importantly, not just the book of Mark, because we don't come to study just who Mark is, but what does it have to do with Jesus? And then we really want to know as well, like, what does it have to do, with us? Because if it has something to do with Mark, something to do with Jesus, then there's something there for us today. So in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, we're going to look at verse 1 through 4. We read some instructions that are kind of weird. And it starts like this. The Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites to send away from the camp anyone who has a defiling skin disease or a discharge of any kind, or who is ceremonially unclean because of a dead body. Send away male and female alike. Send them outside the camp so they will not defile their camp where I dwell among them. The Israelites did so. They sent them outside the camp. They did just as the Lord had instructed Moses. And again, what does that have to do with Mark? And what does that have to do with Jesus? And what would that have to do with us? Because we don't do that in our society, and we don't see that maybe in Mark and what's actually happening here. Well, there are three things that's going on in just this text here that would tell us these are the things that'll get you put out. These are the things that if you're in, you're going to get put out. And these three things are these right here. A skin disease, that'll get you put outside. A discharge of any kind, put outside. Contact with any dead body. If you have contact with a dead body, you are put out. In fact, we just read it. In verse 3, it says that we are to send away any male, female alike, send them outside the camp so they will not defile the camp. The purpose is, if they have a skin disease, if they have some kind of discharge, if there's been contact with dead bodies, we don't know how those people died. What we need to do for a period of time, at least, is get you outside of the camp so you don't infect us inside the camp. And in some ways we can understand that. It's when the person that shakes your hand and says, man, I'm really sick today. And you're like, oh man. And you walk straight over and you wash. I mean, we get it a little bit, but they're put outside the camp. What are we talking about here? So here's what the camp would look like. This is in the days of the exile, when they have left Egypt, freed from slavery, a nomadic people, God's people, and the setup of the camp would have been like this, with the tabernacle, the very dwelling place of God, being right in the center of the community, which is a great place for God to be. Right in the center of us, and the center of a nation, and the center of a community that you live in, that Jesus is the center of your home, that Jesus is the center of your life, that God literally moved in right in the middle of the people. Around him would have been the Levites or the priests that ministered to the Lord day and night. They were the ones that were closest. Next out would have been the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, and those tribes all centered around, faced toward God, centered around that. Now, if you had skin disease, if you had any kind of discharge, if you were in contact with any dead bodies, you're put outside, not just outside of this area, you would be put outside of the entire camp, outside of your tribe, sent away for a period of time. Male and females alike were sent away. And the reason was this, that the unclean were sent outside the camp to make sure nobody inside the camp became unclean. That the unclean would infect those that were clean and make them unclean. Send them away. Until at which point they've either done all the ceremonial washings, or at which point they have offered up sacrifices, or at which point they have eventually made it to one of the priests that checked them and said cleared to come back into the community. Now, what does that have to do with Mark? So the Gospel of Mark, we have 3 stories. We're going to start with this one, 3 stories. And it starts with this, that a man with leprosy came to Jesus. Time out. If a man had leprosy, where is he? He has a skin disease. He's outside the camp. But in this case, we have fast forward a lot of years, hundreds and hundreds of years. And where we're at is where modern Jerusalem is. And what was in that space wasn't a tabernacle, it was a temple, God's very dwelling place. Some of you have been there. I've seen the Western Wall, the wall of the temple that's still there. And I've been there when it's called the Wailing Wall, where people are praying over that. That spot is where God dwelt. Around him would have been those that ministered, the priests that were there. And then the people would gather around, the towns that surrounded them, the walls that are there even today. You can see the walls that surround Jerusalem, but there would be gates, city gates that would be there outside those gates, outside the temple area, outside the houses, outside the gates. And the walls was where Jesus was. A man with leprosy came to Jesus and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, this is great faith, you can make me clean. Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and what? If you touch somebody with a skin disease, you become unclean, and touch the man. Did Jesus not read? Like Numbers? Did he not know Numbers chapter 5? Because there is no chance he didn't know. He knew. He reached out and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Okay? You're not supposed to touch somebody if they're unclean, lest you become unclean. And then just like they're outside the camp, you're sent outside the camp. But something happened in this story that's different. Next story, Mark chapter 5. In this story, and we're going to look at 3 stories. This story, it's the woman. We spoke about her a couple different times over these last 11 weeks, but it's a woman who had a discharge. And the discharge, it could be a discharge from a wound, it could be a discharge from an infection, or it could be a reproductive discharge. She had a 12-year discharge that was happening for her, and she pressed through a crowd. Like, she's not supposed to be there. She's not supposed to be rubbing shoulders with people lest she makes them unclean according to the law in the book of Numbers. And yet she's there and she presses through and grabs Jesus' garment. So he's been touched now. And what happens is the unclean became clean. She was healed. And again in Mark chapter 5, we see another story. And in this story, we read about a young lady, 12 years old, that had passed away. And Jesus, it says, went to her and took her by the hand. He touched her and said to her, Talitha koum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and walked around. So we know from the book of Numbers, these 3 things right here, that touching someone with a skin disease, that'll get you unclean. And touching someone with a discharge, that will make you unclean. And touching someone that was dead, that too will make you unclean. All of those. And if you're unclean, men and women alike, you are sent outside the camp. And yet we find Jesus touching someone with a skin disease, being touched by someone with a discharge, and grabbing by the hand a young lady, 12-year-old girl, that was dead. These 2 stories reflect each other. Those 3 things are in these 3 stories. The Gospel of Mark and the book of Numbers reflect each other. And what is happening here? Like, is Jesus undoing that and saying not to pay attention at all to this? Is that what he's doing? Because that wouldn't make sense with what Jesus actually said in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5, when he said in Matthew 5, I have not come to abolish the law. I've not come to undo the Torah. I've not come to undo the Mosaic books. I've come to bring fulfillment to them. I've come to bring fullness to what you have read before. And what was unclean in this case didn't make Jesus unclean. This is a great reversal. Talk about fulfillment of it. The clean actually made the unclean clean. It's the other way around. When Jesus stepped in, the unclean became clean. And we know that by this right here. In fact, Jesus, next slide please, Jesus actually said this to the guy that was healed of leprosy, proof that he's not trying to go outside of the law. He is actually coming as fulfillment in it. Go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commands for your cleansing. You who were unclean have just been made clean. Go to the priest. Do what we do. Offer the sacrifices. Show them your skin, and the priest will permit you. You were outside, but you're back in again. And what did he say to the woman? The woman, he said, your faith has made you well. He didn't say to her when she touched him, oh no, what are you doing here? What are you rubbing shoulders with everybody for? And now me, and you touched me, and that makes me, he never said any of that. He just looked at her and said, wow, what faith that drove you through the crowd to grab the hem of my garment, and you're healed. Because I've come to bring healing, and the unclean has been made clean. You were outside, but you're back in again. And in the case of the young girl, Talitha Koum, what he was saying to her really is this: rise, stand up, you're okay, you're healed, you're good. You who were quite literally on the outside of all, like the gig was up. You were done here. You're back, you're in, you belong, you're mine. I think about those stories, and think if we take the journey from what does that Old Testament stuff had to do with Mark, and what does Mark have to do with Jesus, and then what does Jesus have to do with us? It's pretty beautiful, actually. That whether it's a skin disease or whether it's a discharge, these are ailments that are physical, whether it's coming into contact with a dead body. In all those cases, Jesus just exercised his power to bring restoration and healing and to make whole again. I've come in fulfillment of all this. I've come that which was on the outside is brought to the inside. That which was broken is healed. That which was isolated is brought into, again, relationship again. All of that. That's the Gospel of Mark, showing the great reversal of what Jesus is doing, but he's not just doing it in these three stories or these three physical things that we're talking about. So many more stories that we could keep chasing that are right inside this room, your story, my story, where Jesus came to you and Jesus came to me and Jesus made a pitch for us and Jesus pulled us in when we were maybe a little like this. A group of us from our staff, we went to a renewal day together over at Ada Bible. And one of the speakers put a picture very much like this one, it might even be that one, up on the screen. It's a picture, or a rendition, if you will, of Saul. a biblical character. Saul's story, he had a backstory like you do and I do. He had a backstory. His story was something, though. Saul's story was such that he was breathing out murderous threats toward any Christians. He was on a mission, a genocide, to wipe out every Christian on the planet before this thing got a good foothold. They were called the people of the way, and he was trying to squash the way. And on his way to undo the way, to put these people, if you will, on the outside as far as he could get them done. A blinding light hit him literally, and he ended up on the ground. This is one rendition. We don't know exactly how he went to the ground, but a rendition of what may have happened. I love this one. Part of it is because I train dogs. I love to train dogs, and I've had several that I've trained. And in our home, what I never want is a dominant dog. A dog that thinks it's top of the pack and that it's in charge in the home. It's dangerous. And so for us, we always wanted subordinate dogs. And the dog that I have right now, there's a way to train a dog to get there. But in doing so, it makes for harmony in the home. And our dog is so subordinate that what happens with our dog, if we drop it off at a kennel or it's around a bunch of dogs at a park or something like that, if a larger dog comes up to our dog, she will roll over just like that on her back in a position that says, I'm not a problem here. I'm completely submissive. I have exposed my underside to you. I am as vulnerable as I can get right now. I'm undone. I'm not trying anything. I think that might have been Saul's position. He's busy persecuting Christians when Jesus met up with him in that blinding light and said, Saul. And he was undone. Because the power and the presence of Jesus is something that when you truly meet him, you will never be the same. And there he was, exposed for what he was, came face to face with who he was, and he submitted in that moment. He realized how wrong he was. And the good thing about this man named Saul, maybe the most important thing about him, was he never forgot who he was. He called himself the chief of sinners. Everything that he wrote, it'd find its way in. I'm the chief of all sinners. Like when it comes to sinning, I'm number one. And when he talked about eventually his name was changed, everything about him was changed. When he eventually became the Apostle Paul, his name changing, he said, I'm the number one sinner, but I'm the last of all the apostles. I'm top in this category, bottom in that category. Those two are connected. I will never see myself as exalted because I know where I come from. I will never forget my story. When he talked about all of his accolades that he could put out there, of all the things that he had accomplished, all the training that he had had, number one rabbi in Judaism, he listed all of that and said, all of that stuff, it amounts to nothing. It's garbage. It's refuse. And the reason it is because the grace that has come to me is so surpassing, so beyond that. And I will never forget where I came from or what I could be. I know for me personally that I am at my very best when it comes to encountering anybody with any story at any time. And I just remember, and don't forget, I remember who I was when Jesus met up with me. And when I take the time to really reflect on and remember what I could be if he didn't go outside the camp and look and touch me and make me clean. I'm at my very best when I give thought to what would be the story of my life today if it just kept playing out, if that would have never happened, if that moment of surrender would have never happened in my life. Where would I be? What would be going on inside of me? What would be the relationships that I have. I can only guess, but I don't have to guess about being forgiven in real time. What I would be if he didn't forgive me yesterday, today, and tomorrow. If he didn't step in and continue to heal and continue to make me the man that he continues to want to make me into, to make me more and more and more like himself. And for today, all I'm asking us is to do what Paul did and never forget your Saul. Never. Because remembering it does three things for us. It fuels gratitude. There's nothing quite like looking back and thinking about where you were and not forgetting when Jesus met up with you or what you could have become, but by the grace of God that can fuel gratitude inside of you. And there's nothing quite like forgetting that will bring us to a place where we just take grace for granted and we don't think a lot about it, and we don't live out of a place of incredible gratitude for God, because it's that drove this man named Saul, who later became Paul. It fueled such gratitude for him that Paul went outside the camp because he's like, I was over here before myself. This is where I was. And Jesus came all the way outside the camp to bring me inside. And you think I'm going to stay here? Not a chance. Not a chance. There are Gentiles, there are non-Jews that have never heard of Jesus. And he went on a journey, a missionary journey, one area after another at the cost of his body being pummeled and beaten and stoned, so that he, out of this incredible gratitude, would give his life to the one who had rescued him. Second, remembering protects us from pride. It protects us from that pride that can rise up. And when we forget what we were, we stop remembering what we could have been. We can find ourselves in places that way too many find themselves in. So glad I'm not like that. I don't want to associate with them. I wish that everybody would just kind of huddle up and we're different. We're different than them. There's us and them in the world. I just don't think Jesus thinks that way. I really don't. For God so loved, what, some of us? No, all of us. And when we remember, we were them. We were outside. Every one of us were apart from grace. And grace came out here and found us. Remembering protects us from any kind of pride, thinking the us and them, they, but not me. It's just us, that's it. And number three, remembering replaces criticism with compassion. We move from that place to a place of great compassion. I was there. What would I not do to go help somebody find their way back to God who hasn't yet? I will do whatever I can, go wherever I can, leverage whatever I can to reach whoever I can. That was what was driving this guy named Paul, who said, I'm not going to forget my Saul. You know, the best church maybe service I've ever been to, it wasn't actually a church service, and it was a 7-year anniversary of a friend of mine. We were riding a motorcycle one day, and he pulled over on the side of the road. I pulled behind him, and he said, it's 7 years today of my sobriety. And it just hit me as we were riding. And he invited me to go with him to an AA meeting. He said, it's an open meeting. You don't have to be an alcoholic to come in, but you can come with if you'd like to, but I want to go. And I went, I'll go. And so never had been at an AA meeting before, but I went into it. I'm telling you, it was the most incredible church service because we got in there and everybody remembered their Saul. Every single one of them did, was remembering the story. And they did this way, hi, my name is, and I'm an alcoholic. And one by one by one, when it got to John, my friend, John said, "Hi, my name's John. I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of God, today, I'm 7 years sober." And the room erupted. They threw a celebration, stopped right there. And then they got the 7-year pin out from him, put it on him. And then I got curious about AA because I'm like, there's no hiding in this room. There's no pretending in this room. It's just a room of people that are on a journey together who understood. Once I was way over here. I was so lost. I was so broken and so hurting. But I'm finding in this community where I'm in acceptance and love, and I'm finding that there's hope. And the last step of AA, some of you know what it is. Maybe because you're on that step and you're so grateful to God that you're on that step. But the 12th step is to stand over here, having been restored, and looking over there, and with compassion saying, I will do everything I can to help those who struggle with what I struggled with and still have to be really careful with to find their way back to healing. I think that's our mission. That remembering does something inside of us to feel gratitude. Remembering has the ability to protect us from any kind of pride. Remembering will replace that criticism with compassion to do what the mission of our church is, to help people find their way back to God. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the gift of this space. Thank you for the power of the word, where we read out of the book of Numbers. If we were only reading that, we might skip right on by and go, that's way back when. It's not way back when, it's here. And then we read the Gospel of Mark and we go, wow, look at Jesus. But when we put these two together, we can think, what about me? How about me being on the receiving end of that, and then now on the serving side of that, to be filled with compassion? And so come, Lord Jesus, do your work in us and then through us. Amen.